February 1959. In the far north of the Soviet Union, where the land forgets the sound of voices, 9 young hikers stood at the edge of the world. They were students, engineers, dreamers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Their goal? To conquer one of the most remote corners of the Ural Mountains. The place they chose was remote even by Siberian standards. No villages, no roads, no maps worth trusting. Only endless pine forests and ridgelines wrapped in fog, where the sun rose pale and cold, and night fell like a curtain of iron. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, just 23, was methodical and fearless. He had planned the expedition for months, plotting every camp, every supply drop, every mile of the journey. Locals watched them pass through the last outpost of humanity, the village of Vigier. It was a mining town at the edge of the world where chimneys smoked and dogs barked at ghosts. The villagers warned them not to go farther. They pointed toward the mountains, toward a place called Kholat Syakhl. In the Mansi language, it meant the mountain of the dead. The hikers laughed. They didn't believe in curses or legends. They believed in compasses and maps, in skill and science. But the wilderness beyond Vigier doesn't care what you believe in. For days they moved north. Their skis left 2 faint lines through snow that glowed pale beneath a sun that never warmed. The forest thinned. The trees grew twisted, bent by centuries of wind, and the silence became absolute. Sometimes they saw the faint prints of wolves, sometimes only their own. At night, the sky burned with 1,000 cold stars, and the wind hummed through the pines like something alive. They sang, they wrote in their journals, they laughed into the storm. One entry read, "The wind is strong today, but our spirit is stronger." But in the final photographs, the smiles fade. Their faces tighten. Their eyes look past the camera as if they sense something waiting beyond the snow. On February 1st, they reached the slopes of Kholat Syakhl. The mountain rose like a gray wall, its crown lost in fog, its sides scoured by unbroken wind. They were meant to descend to the valley below, but the storm had swallowed their trail. Dyatlov decided to stop, to make camp right there on the mountainside, an exposed slope with no shelter but what they could build. They cut the snow with their skis, pitched the tent, and staked it against the blizzard. Inside, they cooked a small meal. They joked. They took photographs, the last ones ever seen. In those photos, you can still see it, the glow of the lantern through canvas, the snow swirling outside, the fragile warmth of 9 human lives surrounded by 1,000 miles of silence. By morning, that tent would be torn open from within, and 9 lives would vanish into the mountain. But for now, they slept. They rested as only the young can do, unaware that the storm was not the only force they would face. The sun sank behind the ridge. The storm rolled in, thick, white, relentless. As the wind screamed across the slope of Kholat Syakhl, 9 figures crouched inside their fragile shelter. A thin layer of canvas separated them from the wrath of the mountain. Inside, the air was damp with breath and smoke from the stove. They ate a simple meal, bits of dried meat and bread, laughed quietly, wrote their last notes in journals now frozen in time. Igor Dyatlov was calm, methodical as always. He wrote about the day's conditions, about the strong wind, the exhaustion, and their progress. Nothing strange, nothing fearful. One of them strummed a mandolin, a fragile melody rising against the storm outside. The sound would have carried only a few feet before being devoured by the wind. Outside, the snow swept sideways across the slope. No trees, no cover, only a vast, white emptiness that seemed to go on forever. That night, the temperature fell below -30. Inside the tent, their laughter faded, their lantern flickered, then went dark. No one knows what happened next. Maybe it began with a noise, a strange vibration beneath the snow. Maybe it was something they saw outside, a light, a shadow, something that didn't belong. Whatever it was, it broke something inside them. 9 young people cut their way out of the tent from the inside. They left everything, their boots, their coats, their food, their maps, their cameras. They stepped barefoot into the storm. The snow swallowed their footprints almost as soon as they made them. But what remained told a strange story. The tracks were orderly, 9 sets of footprints, single file, leading down the slope. They weren't running, they weren't stumbling. They were walking, as though obeying a command only they could hear. Searchers later followed that trail. It led them to the edge of a forest, dark pine trees standing like sentinels in the snow. Beneath one of them, the first signs of the hikers. 2 men, barefoot, lying side by side. Their hands were torn, the bark above them shredded, as if they had climbed, desperate to see something through the storm. Between them, the remnants of a fire, black, burned down to embers long cold. Around them, nothing but snow. The rescuers pressed on. A few hundred meters away, they found 3 more. Dyatlov was among them. Their bodies lay facing the camp, as if they had tried to return. Each one frozen mid-step, hands outstretched, fingers black with frostbite. And then, the final 4. Buried deep in a ravine under 15 feet of snow. Their injuries were different, worse. Their ribs crushed inward, skulls fractured, no external wounds, as if the force that killed them came from inside their bodies. One woman's eyes were gone, her tongue missing. Her skin was pale, tinted with an orange hue. Her hair gray, as if aged overnight. The rescuers couldn't explain it. They said the scene felt wrong, silent, still, too clean. The snow around the ravine had not been disturbed. No sign of a fall, no sign of a fight. Just 9 bodies scattered in the snow, frozen in positions that looked almost deliberate. What could make 9 people walk calmly to their deaths in temperatures that could turn a breath to ice? Not panic, not confusion. Something else. Something that reached into the human mind and tore out its sense of safety. Whatever it was, it followed them down the mountain. When the hikers failed to return, the first to worry were their families. They knew the expedition was dangerous, but not reckless. Days turned into weeks, still no sign. At the Ural Polytechnic Institute, students began whispering in hallways. Professors signed letters, and soon a search party was formed. They brought skis, dogs, supplies, and something unspoken, the fear that they might not find friends, but bodies. The search teams moved slowly through the wilderness. The snow was waist deep, the temperature unforgiving. They followed the trail the hikers had left behind, the broken trees, the faint marks of sleds, until they reached the open slope of Kholat Syakhl. There, they found the tent. It lay half buried in snow, its canvas torn and collapsed. The ropes hung loose, the poles bent as if pressed from the inside. Inside, the belongings of 9 people, carefully arranged as if time had simply stopped mid-motion. Boots lined in rows, coats folded neatly, a journal open to a half-finished sentence. The stove disassembled, the food untouched, a camera half filled with film. It was as though they'd intended to come back, only they never did. The rescuers looked for tracks. What they found made no sense. Footprints leading away from the tent, 9 sets, descending toward the forest. Bare feet, some in socks, a few in one shoe. The line was straight, organized, not the pattern of panic, but of purpose. And at the edge of the forest, beneath a cedar tree, the first 2 bodies. Barefoot, half naked, frozen beside the remnants of a small fire. The skin on their hands and feet was burned, as though they'd tried to pull something burning from the flames. The bark above them was torn away, their fingers stripped raw. Above them, the cedar branches broken nearly 15 feet high, as if someone had climbed in desperation, or to escape something below. A few hundred meters away, 3 more. Dyatlov was among them. They had died facing the tent, as if trying to return. Their hands were frozen mid-motion, grasping toward the white void. The last 4 were missing. For 2 long months, the rescuers searched through snow and storm. And then, deep in a ravine, they found them. Their bodies buried beneath 15 feet of compacted snow, their clothing torn and stained, and their injuries impossible to explain. 2 had crushed chests, ribs shattered inward like the aftermath of a car crash. Another's skull was fractured, a clean break without bruising. One woman's eyes were gone, her tongue torn away. Yet none of their clothes were torn, no external wounds. The snow beneath them was faintly pink, as if blood had seeped slowly through the ice. The rescuers stood in silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. They knew they were looking at something unnatural. but no one dared say the words aloud. The Soviet authorities arrived soon after. Investigators took photographs, measured footprints, and collected what evidence the snow would allow. Their reports were dry, clinical language, typed in cold offices far from the mountains. But behind those words lay confusion and fear. The hikers' clothes contained traces of radiation. Some garments glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. Their skin had a strange orange tint, their hair gray, brittle. Animals avoided the site. Rescue dogs whimpered, refused to enter the tent area. The cause of death remained elusive. No avalanches, no weapon marks, no struggle. Just a phrase, typed neatly at the end of the official report. Death caused by an unknown compelling force. It explained nothing, and it haunted everything. The case was closed. The bodies were buried, the files sealed. But secrets like this don't stay buried forever. When the files were sealed, the rumors began. You cannot hide a mystery this large in a country that breathes suspicion. An avalanche, they said, simple, logical, cold. But the slope was wrong, too shallow, too firm. No trace of collapse, no wall of snow. Others whispered of a fight, tension in the group, madness born of hunger and cold. Yet the bodies told another story. No bruises, no broken knuckles, no struggle. Then the shadows lengthened. Talk turned to the military, to secret tests in the mountains. There were reports of parachute mines, weapons that detonate high above ground, crushing lungs and shattering ribs without ever touching skin. It would explain the injuries. It would explain the lights. Because there were lights. Glowing orbs seen by villagers miles away that night. Orange, silent, drifting against the storm. One of the hikers' cameras held a final image, a blurred streak of brilliance cutting through the dark. No one knows what it captured. Years later, scientists offered another theory, infrasound. The wind, howling across the pass, could carve through the rocks and create vibrations too low for the ear, frequencies that stir panic, vertigo, hallucination. Imagine standing in the dark, your chest trembling with a noise you cannot hear, your heart racing against the air itself. Would you run? Would you flee your tent into the snow just to escape the feeling of your mind tearing apart? Perhaps the mountain didn't need to strike. Perhaps it only needed to speak. But there are other explanations, ones that belong not to science, but to silence. The Mansi people, the keepers of this land, have stories older than Russia itself. They say the mountains are alive, that they remember every footstep, every trespass. They say some peaks are sacred, and some are forbidden. Perhaps the hikers disturbed something sleeping. Perhaps they saw what the old stories warned of, the lights that lead travelers astray, the voices in the storm. Decades passed. The snow erased the footprints, but not the questions. Each generation found its own answer, and none found peace. Filmmakers came, scientists, skeptics. They measured, tested, theorized. The mountain remained unchanged, cold, distant, silent. And every year, new hikers returned, drawn by the same invisible hand. They followed the trail to the old campsite. They pitched their tents where the 9 once slept, They said the nights were unnaturally still, that even the wind held its breath. Sometimes they heard laughter, sometimes footsteps just beyond the firelight. If you stand there long enough, you can almost feel them, the weight of their silence pressing through the snow. The mountain is patient. It never explains. Maybe the truth is buried there, frozen somewhere beneath the ice, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to dig. Or maybe the truth died with them. The Dyatlov Pass became a memorial, a symbol, a scar. 9 names carved in stone, 9 faces fading from photographs. But their story, it lingers, in the frost, in the air, in the endless white expanse of a place that refuses to let go of its dead. Years later, long after the snow had claimed their camp, a man searching through old archives made a discovery. A folder, mislabeled. Inside, fragments of the original investigation. Black and white photographs, their edges curled with age. Handwritten notes in fading ink. Sketches of bodies, of footprints, of the torn tent. And one page torn from a journal. The paper cracked, the words half vanished into frost. It read only, "We are no longer alone." No one could say who wrote it. No one could say when. But that single sentence, simple, human, terrified, echoed through decades of silence. The newly found documents deepened the mystery. Radiation readings that didn't match the terrain. Weather data missing from the official logbooks. Military flight paths redacted. Even the names of certain investigators removed. For every question answered, 2 more appeared. The case seemed to grow in shadow the longer it was studied. Some said the truth was simple, buried beneath layers of Soviet secrecy. Others, that it was beyond comprehension. More than 60 years have passed. The wind still scours the same ridge. The same stars hang cold above the pass. But something in that place feels older than time. The snow never melts completely. The silence never ends. Hikers still travel there. They pitch their tents on the frozen slope, just as Dyatlov and his team did. They say at night the wind changes tone. It hums, deep and low, like a voice just beneath hearing. Some claim to see figures in the snow, shadows that move when the moon disappears. Maybe imagination, maybe memory, maybe something else. The truth of the Dyatlov Pass incident may never be known. Science can measure, calculate, theorize. It can tell us what is probable, but it cannot tell us what is impossible. The mountain does not care for answers. It only keeps what it is given. The hikers gave it their laughter, their warmth, their lives. And in return, it gave them immortality, a story carved in ice and mystery. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the sound of the earth itself. Maybe it was something no human language could name. Whatever it was, it left its mark on that mountain and on every person who's ever heard their story.